And for this program of all to be selected, it is a bit of a surprise. First of all, many of the criticisms that have been found about the program by the State Department have already been corrected. Secondly, if there are problems still with the program, I would like to plead with the members of this committee to let's make improvements and corrections rather than to decide to eliminate the program in its entirety. And so I'm making an appeal to my good friend from Virginia, Mr. Goodlatte, to consider either corrections or withdrawing the amendment until we have time to deal with it. Now, we have a proposal to eliminate the diversity visa program. And so I'm looking for ways to make our immigration system work for people that desire and meet the qualifications to come in. We are in the process in this bill attacking a very important legal pathway for immigration to this country. And remember, Bob, that immigration for people of color has always historically been on a discriminatory basis, unfortunately. It has been limited to some extent now, but for us now to throw it out in its entirety because we found one instance in which anything connected with terrorism has ever occurred in all the years that it's existed. So I begin the consideration of this bill with the understanding that the diversity program has always been an important part of our immigration system, and the ways to improve it rather than to throw this program out whole hog. It provides a legal avenue for diverse populations of qualified individuals to immigrate to this country. Without this program, our immigration system would look very different and not in a good way. African immigrants make up roughly 1/3 of the diversity visa program, but only 3% of the family and employment-based immigrants. The truth is that eliminating the diversity program, quite frankly, and I say this in all fairness, would basically eliminate African immigration to this country, and would be interpreted as a discriminatory move on the part of the committee and those who are supporting its total elimination. It also plays, the program also plays an important foreign policy role for the United States, a very important one. In some countries around the world, the diversity program represents the only realistic opportunity for people who want to play by the rules in immigration to get here. It sustains the idea of the American dream because applicants from around the world know that if you get here, anything is possible. There's been so many success stories of immigrants who come here. And the critics point to this one diversity recipient who did get in trouble and do something wrong. But remember, 800,000 immigrants have entered the United States through the diversity visa program. Let's not end it now. And I thank you for the additional time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Connors. The gentleman from California, Mr. Galloway, the chairman of the Immigration Subcommittee, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I wholeheartedly support H.R. 704, which would eliminate the visa lottery program under which 55,000 individuals are chosen completely at random each year to receive these immigrant visas. The visa lottery, which was first implemented in 1995, has long been filled with fraud. The State Department's Inspector General testified in 2003, 2004, and 2005 about fraud and abuse in the program. And that's still the case in 2011. When the Immigration Subcommittee heard in our April hearing from witnesses who testified that the program is subject to fraud by applicants themselves, as well as third-party brokers who abuse both the visa system and those applicants. And why is fraud such a concern? Well, because terrorists have already used the visa lottery as means of entering this country. The Egyptian terrorist who murdered 2 Americans at LA International Airport in 2002 was a diversity visa recipient when his wife was selected for the lottery. And a Pakistani national received a diversity visa when his parents were selected for the lottery, pleaded guilty in 2002 to conspiring to wage jihad by plotting to destroy electrical power plants, the Israeli consulate, and other South Florida targets. He had reportedly told his friends that he wanted to wage war against the United States. But terrorists are not the only people who abuse the visa lottery. At the subcommittee's April hearing, we heard testimony detailing how foreign organized crime groups utilize the visa lottery program to bring people here into the United States. The lottery is by its very nature a gamble, and in this case it's a gamble that our national security can't afford. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 704, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. The gentleman from California, Ms. Loughran, the ranking member of the Immigration Subcommittee, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are fond of saying that while they are opposed to illegal immigration, they are very much in favor of legal immigration. But I can't see how anything in this bill is anything other than an attack on legal immigration and legal immigrants. Those on the other side say the problem with the diversity visa program is that it's rife with fraud and abuse. Well, if that's the concern, then let's find ways to fix the program. We can add protections to eliminate fraud. We can require application fees to prevent third-party filings and other ways to game the system. We can strengthen security provisions if there's a problem with those, but I would note that the Congressional Research Service told us in its April report, and I quote, we found no documented evidence that diversity visa immigrants posed a terrorist or other threat. But this bill does not seek ways to fix the program. It simply wants to do away with it. And what's worse, the bill would throw all those immigrant visas away, even though the country's other legal immigration programs are starved for visas and are suffering from decade-long backlogs. If the majority actually thought that the diversity visa program was so broken that it needed to be eliminated, but also truly supported legal immigration, they would have made those visas available to family and employment-based immigrants. But again, that's not what the bill does. It simply tosses those visas in the trash, even while U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents are kept apart from their family members, and American businesses are denied the employees they need to move our economy forward. At a recent hearing on this bill in the Immigration Subcommittee, the author of the bill lamented that the visa lottery program is unfair to immigrants who comply with U.S. immigration laws, noting that most family and employer-sponsored immigrants currently face a wait of many, many years to legally enter the U.S. Well, we were actually concerned.
We're currently listening to Congressman Zoe Lofgren from California, who is the ranking member, the Democratic leader of the Immigration Subcommittee on the House Judiciary Committee. I'm Chris Chmielenski, joined by Roy Beck, our president, and Andrew Good, who heads up our LEAP program and also has several years of Capitol Hill experience. We apologize. We've had some crazy technical things going on in our office right now. And we couldn't confirm that we were actually going out live, but now we know that we are broadcasting something. So
well, maybe you got some more sarcastic comments along the way too.
That could be. So
welcome to the conference room of Numbers USA.
Right, and of course we're watching the hearing for the Visa Lottery. They started about 10 minutes ago. It was started by Chairman Lamar Smith, who chairs the House Judiciary Committee. It was followed by remarks from Congressman Conyers from Michigan, who's the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee. Then Congressman Gallagly from California spoke on behalf of the Visa Lottery, or on behalf of the bill to end the Visa Lottery.
And Gallagly's the chair of the Immigration Subcommittee.
Right. And now we have Congressman Lofgren, who opposes Representative Goodlatte's bill to end the Visa Lottery.
And Lofgren is the ranking member of the Immigration Subcommittee. And we're going to try to give you a chance. I mean, we're not going to try to yak over all of this, but you're going to hear a fair amount of repetition when you get into these markups. Every member wants to have their statement. Here's the key thing, just so you know what's at stake. The Visa Lottery was passed in 1990. It was an invention by Senator Ted Kennedy of Massachusetts, and it was designed as a way to legalize about 25,000 illegal aliens from Ireland every year. That was the purpose of it. In order to get it through Congress, they designed this idea of a diversity lottery, so there are 25,000 other visas a year would be done by lottery, and this would be for people from countries that do not traditionally send immigrants to the United States. This means that now after about, I can't remember exactly, but after 5-6 years or so of mopping up a lot of the illegal Irish in the country, it then went to where all 55,000 a year were to countries that don't traditionally send. Now what this means is, as Congressman Conyers pointed out, is there are a lot of countries from Northern Africa that have not traditionally sent, and they do end up sending quite a few through the lottery. It also means a lot of Eastern European former communist countries that broke up out of the former Soviet Union, and disproportionately it means a lot of people coming from terrorist-sponsoring countries. A lot of the countries that hate the United States the most, kind of not surprisingly, have not had a lot of immigrants, a lot of connections to the United States. The Visa Lottery pulls especially from there. And that's why you'll hear a fair amount of stuff about terrorism, security. But I must say that Numbers USA's top concern is that these are 55,000 permanent work permits that are issued to foreign workers every year at a time that 22 million American workers who want a full-time job can't find one. So kind of listen to this along the way. The big debate today seems to be people who want to save the Visa Lottery. Their deal is, let's just fix the flaws in it. But of course, for us, the flaw is that it exists at all. The flaw is that it brings in 55,000 permanent workers each year. Now, here's Congressman Goodlatte, who has been the sponsor of this bill for years.
Support and therefore should move forward. In fact, this legislation has passed the House of Representatives on a previous occasion under a Republican Congress, and under a Democratic Congress, it passed in terms of cutting off the program as a part of an appropriations measure. So again, it has that kind of bipartisan support that I think indicates that it should be halted. I'd also ask to make a part of the record the claims I've listened to about how this program has been fixed. Just this morning, just today, the USCIS sent out an email. It says, have you or someone you know recently received an email claiming you won the green card lottery and asking you to send or wire money? Don't fall for it. The sender is trying to steal your money. And that links to an email sent out on March 2nd of 2011 that talks about the extent of this problem. That's a problem with people who prey on these millions of people who seek to change their lives by the 1 in 300 chance they have of having their particular name drawn out of a visa lottery. Not a good way to plan your future, not something that I think is great in terms of the United States, but certainly a scam. Then there is the problem of the ongoing reports of individuals who change one letter in the spelling of their name or do other things to have multiple entries and commit fraud in attempting to apply for the program. And then there's the claim that people who come here are people with special skills. Well, in point of fact, the law requires barely more than a high school education and no particular job skills. And I would also ask you to put into the record a Wall Street Journal article dated just a month ago, June 25th, 2011, entitled "I'm Not Sure I Am Lucky," about a Turkish immigrant who won the visa lottery, came to the United States expecting that he would get a great engineering job because that's what his qualifications are, and he's driving a cab in Los Angeles. The fact of the matter is this program is wrought with problems for the Immigration Service. During the hearing, we had a former consular officer testify that if you ask consular officers around the world what the #1 problem that they have to deal with in their consular offices, they would overwhelmingly name the visa lottery as that program. The problems have not been fixed, and we haven't even begun to talk about the national security problems or what I think is the real problem, and that is that this doesn't address the fact that here in the United States, immigration, legal immigration, which we're probably the most generous nation in the world for legal immigration, must be a two-way street. It should recognize that there are millions of people around the world who want to come to the United States to better their lives for greater opportunity, but it should also recognize that the people we admit to the United States should fulfill those needs. And the primary way we've done that historically has been through family reunification, people with job skills that are needed in the United States, or people who are fleeing some kind of persecution or turmoil in their countries through our political asylum and refugee programs. This program is not needed. When I was practicing immigration law prior to my election to Congress, I represented people from more than 70 countries who were seeking to legally immigrate in the United States back in the 1980s and early 1990s. And many of those people, I would say to the gentleman from Michigan, were from African nations. We should not have an immigration policy that discriminates. I certainly agree with that. But the fact of the matter is, this policy discriminates in what I think is a much more concerning way than simply what happens as a result of the luck of the draw. And here's how that happens. There are about, it varies from year to year, but there are about 15 countries where each year you cannot participate in the visa lottery because, not based upon ethnicity, not based upon anything other than the country you are from, you are not allowed to participate. Right. And among those countries over the years are Mexico, Canada, the Philippines, India, China, the United Kingdom, Nigeria, Egypt. Different years, different countries are on that list. And on that list are people who are waiting to come to the United States who have long waiting lists. And so they are bypassed. They are simply bypassed by somebody who, not based upon having a job skill that's needed in the country, or even a job, not based upon having family reunification, but simply based upon pure luck. They get to get a visa and come to the United States. What for? Why? Well, certainly from their perspective, we understand why. But here in the United States, where we have a 9.2% unemployment rate and 14 million Americans looking for work, why are we adding people who are not, I know my time's expired, but why are we adding people who are not needed in terms of family reunification or particular job skills? So I yield back, Mr. Chairman, and I hope my colleagues will join me in ending this very bad program.
Thank you, Mr. Goodlatte.
Part-time work. That's a reason between the 14
I'd like to be
and 22.
recognized for unanimous consent request.
Without objection.
I would like to add into the record of this meeting the report that we received from the Congressional Research Service titled Diversity Immigrant Visa Lottery Issues,
This is Zoe Lofgren from California, and she was the chair of the Immigration Subcommittee in the previous two Congresses. She's now the ranking member. And one of the most strong open borders advocates.
So with that objection, the record will be made a part of the record report will be made a part of the record. Does the gentleman from Texas, Ms. Jackson-Lee, have an amendment?
I have an amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 704, offered by Ms. Jackson-Lee. Strike Section 2 and insert the following. Section 2, recommendations for elimination of potential for fraud and other security risks in diversity immigrant programs.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read, and the gentlewoman from Texas is recognized to explain her amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I enjoyed the discourse and debate of the ranking members and the sponsor of the bill. And I start by indicating that my amendment really reinforces the question, if not legal immigration, then what? The diversity visa amendment process, was found in 2007 by the DL that no evidence shows that diversity visa immigrants pose a terrorist or other kind of threat. My amendment requires the Department of Homeland Security and Department of State to do what I believe Republicans have spoken about in the past. Which is in support of legal immigration. Let's make it better, and let's ensure that there's a legal immigration structure so that no mercy need be given to those who are here undocumented. And my amendment would reinforce the diversity visa program, eliminate the elimination that is in the underlying bill, and ask the Department of Homeland Security, Department of State to make recommendations on the elimination of fraud in the diversity visa program. This amendment would strike Section 2 of H.R. 704 and replace it with a requirement that the Secretary of DHS, in consultation with the Secretary of DOS, report back to the Committee on Judiciary of the House and Senate within 180 days of the date of enactment their recommendation for the elimination of fraud in diversity visa program. There are only 55,000.
So in these markups, I mean, at the end of this, there's going to be a vote. That's right. There's going to be votes on amendments. Amendments will be offered. What kind of control does the chairman, in this case, Chairman Lamar Smith from Texas, what kind of control does he have over whether amendments are offered?
Well, there is a process in place where the amendment has to be germane. So we'll see how they work that out with the parliamentarian, and there are different rules for every bill as to which amendments are germane.
So every committee has a parliamentarian?
Correct.
Okay.
And then in this case, we've got a program, in this case the Visa Lottery, that has a long history of fraud and abuse, and has actually been legislatively acted upon, as Mr. Goodlatte was talking about,
And the State Department has vigorously
over the last
that this is an
5 to 10 years, a couple times. And
One
there's
of
still
the
no plan
largest
to eliminate
opportunities
fraud
for
and
friendship,
abuse.
collaboration,
So this
and
amendment
trade,
would just simply
is on the continent of Africa.
tell them to make a plan
And,
as the program continues to go on.
I must say, I find it a little bit interesting that
talented individuals to come and
that in this case, the
United
political
States
minority on this committee, the Democrats, were in power the previous 4 years, but never they had the opportunity to improve the lottery, to perhaps save it. Of course, never took that opportunity. Now this is, but the key problem with Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee's amendment is that it gets at the wrong point, which is that the main problem with the lottery is the fraud. The main problem with the lottery is that it brings in 55,000 people for no purpose whatsoever. That is, it raffles off permanent work permits and raffles off U.S. citizenship. And I hope, one of the things we'll watch is how effective the supporters of this bill are in making that point. Right now, I would say I'm giving them only a B in terms of their talk so far. I don't think they've been as good as they could be at making this point. I think to the extent that they focus on security, they open themselves up to basically Sheila Jackson-Lee is right. If your concerns about security, and same Conyers is saying the same thing. If your concerns about security, let's go after security. We did nothing about it when we were in power, but nonetheless, that would be the argument. So that'll be interesting to watch this back and forth. Now, in a minute, she will finish with her argument for the amendment, and then if there is a parliamentary challenge, who will make that?
Well, I think in most cases it seems like either the Chairman Gallagly or Chairman Smith. In this case, I think Chairman Gallagly would reserve a point of order right when the amendment is read. Okay. And so I think that we'll see that on the amendments that are going to be subject to a point of order. Gives them a little chance to explain kind of what the amendment is, kind of talk a little bit about it, but then not hear as extensive of arguments as they would on one where there would be no point of order, one that is germane, one that they will vote on.
The Judiciary Committee is traditionally the most partisan committee in the House, or close to it.
It is definitely a partisan committee.
I mean, it tends to have Republicans and Democrats who are in very safe seats, and who therefore tend to be, the Republicans tend to be the most conservative among Republicans, and the Democrats are the most liberals among Democrats. So probably on most votes in the Judiciary Committee, they're party line votes. What is the party split, Chris, in the House Judiciary Committee?
22 Republicans, 16 Democrats.
22-16. Now, on immigration, we know that Republicans often split. There's different kinds of caucus of philosophies. So that would be so that means that at 22-16 split, how many Republicans could join the Democrats to pass a sort of a hostile amendment? Would be what, 3?
3.
Right.
Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah.
No,
because that would make it
1919
and a tie. No, because a tie would kill the amendment.
So the rule of the committee is a tie kills whatever they're voting on.
Right.
Okay. The chairman gets to vote, right? So 22. Yeah. So 3 would bring 22 down to 19. Would bring 16 up to 19.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can only have 2 defections. Quick question, Andrew. The parliamentarian who will make the ultimate decision on whether or not the amendment is germane or not, that's a nonpartisan person, right?
Correct.
So it should be independent.
Correct.
Okay.
And so okay, let's see what.
Already. In fact, we've had studies from the State Department, we've had studies from the Immigration Service, we've had studies from CRS. The fact of the matter is that when
Goodlatte. Thank you.
The party of the gentlewoman from California was in the majority, and she was chairman of this subcommittee, in spite of all of these studies being available to her, outlining all of the problems that we've described, nothing, not a thing, was done to fix those here in the Congress with the legislative solutions that she talks about. The visa lottery program is a national security threat, and it should be shut down sooner rather than later. We simply cannot afford to allow hostile foreign intelligence officers and terrorists to continue to enter the country through this program. Also, we know that this program is, on its face, discriminatory. The Immigration Subcommittee has already conducted hearings on this very issue. In a previous Congress, we heard from an expert witness that the program discriminates against many foreign nationals based on race and nationality. The program currently excludes citizens from Mexico, Haiti, El Salvador, China, India, Vietnam, and others. In addition, there are many ways in which immigrants from all countries can enter the U.S. legally.
Has testified before the committee about the fact that the visa lottery actually is based on discrimination. It's discriminatory on national origin. Our position as NumbersUSA has always been that our immigration policy should not be based on national origin, race, religion, really any of those things. And yet the lottery system is something that has been set up that is based on national origin. So he's making, I think he's basically making that point. And Rosemary Jenks' testimony, I know it's been used fairly widely. It's quite a paper and a study about how the lottery system brought back national origin discrimination.
And you can find a copy of it on our website under the Issues menu by clicking Visa Lottery.
Gotcha. Issues menu.
And gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I support the gentlelady's amendment, I think it would be worthwhile to know what we're doing before we do it. And I think that would be the impact of her amendment. I would note also, and I think it's clear, but I'm not sure, and so that's why I'm raising it. We have 55,000 diversity visas a year, but 5,000 of those go to relief for Nicaraguans. As the committee, at least those members who've been on the committee for a long time will doubtless recall, there was a refugee crisis with Nicaraguans, many of whom ended in the United States, and rather than support those Nicaraguans in a way that was expansive, as we did, and as I think we should have, with other disadvantaged migrations, for example, from Cuba or from Vietnam, we have sort of doled out in a rather limited fashion visas to the Nicaraguans. Now, 5,000 of the visas are supposed to be deducted from the diversity visa program. And I assume that somehow an additional 5,000 visas are going to magically appear so that the Nicaraguans will not be disadvantaged. This is something that was bipartisan. Mr. Berman was a leader in this, along with both of the Diaz-Balart members of Congress, and I would hope that we might clarify that. And I wanted to say a further thing about the whole point of the diversity visa program. I was not in Congress when it was enacted, but it was originally, the concern was expressed when we went to a per-country system in 1965, that we would end up narrowing the pool of immigrants because our system was primarily based on family relationships. And interestingly enough, at the time, the motivation was concern by then Chairman Peter Rodino, and then on the Senate side, then Chairman Ted Kennedy, that ultimately there would be no immigrants from Italy or Ireland, and that there ought to be some way to make sure that that flow could continue and that we would have a diverse immigration system.
Actually, Zoe Lofgren from California, who's very much in favor of as high of immigration as possible, and has never shown any concern about unemployed Americans when it comes to competing with foreign workers. She's right about this in the sense that the visa lottery is something that is designed in many ways to bring more white people into the United States. That's what makes it kind of funny to hear Ranking Member Conyers of Detroit say that suggest that it's racist to kill the lottery, because the fact is the lottery brings in a higher percentage of white immigrants than any other program, than the rest of our program. We reject the idea that immigration ought to be designed to create any kind of a racial, in any direction at all, any kind of a racial result. I find that kind of interesting. I want to point out to you some history here. It was mentioned by Congressman Goodlatte a little earlier. On the floor of the House on December 16, 2005, so 5.5 years ago, December 16, 2005, at 7:08 p.m. that evening, the House voted on the Goodlatte Amendment. And it was an amendment to the famous Sensenbrenner Big Bill the Sensenbrenner Big Bill would have required mandatory E-Verify and a bunch of other things. It did not include the lottery, and so Goodlatte introduced his amendment to kill the lottery. And that amendment was attached to the bill. It was passed by the House. That bill was attached to the House. And that amendment to kill the lottery passed on a vote of 273 to 148. Absolutely, overwhelmingly, the House voted 273 to 148 to kill the lottery for this very amendment, actually. Of those votes, 215 Republicans voted to kill it, and 6 Republicans voted no. We'll have to look to see who those 6 Republicans were. Kind of interesting that they must have really supported the lottery to do that. But the Democrats split much more. 142 Democrats voted against it. In other words, they voted like the Democrats on this committee. But 57 Democrats in the House of Representatives in December 2005 voted to kill the lottery. 57. So that truly made, I mean, you know, I think by any form you'd say, with that, when you have that many members of the other party, 57, that's a bipartisan vote. So the Democratic position on this bill is much more diverse than we're going to hear in the Judiciary Committee today. But this is the first time we've had since December of '05. Unfortunately, the Senate never took up this bill. But I think we have some plans. We have some plans. Our Capitol Hill team has some plans to make sure if this thing gets through the committee, gets through the House, that it will get a vote on the Senate this year. It's going to take some major work. All right, let's see what else is going on here.
There, I've got something. Thank you. Double push the red light. It comes on. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you bringing this bill before the committee. I'd like to issue a challenge to my colleagues on the other side. And that is, let's see if we can go through this entire markup today without profiling. I think that'd be a worthy challenge. Right now I hear the gentleman from Tennessee profile Italians and Irish as if they might have a standard position because of their race or ethnicity. I think they're all human beings with individual opinions and judgment. I've heard the gentlelady from California and the gentlelady from Texas essentially profile Africa. There's a lot of diversity in Africa. People of all races, ethnicities, and religions there, and I don't think we should think about them as a single unit. I think we should think about them as individuals. And then the language that gets a little less specific in here that's designed to cause us to maybe go a little soft is we should take care that we carve out the 5,000 or 10,000, whatever that number might be for Nicaraguans, quote, so that Nicaraguans won't be disadvantaged, close quote. How is it a disadvantage when you no longer have a special category, when you're back into the line with the other 50 million people in the world that have lined up in a legal way to respect America's immigration laws and come into the United States in the appropriate way? You know, the argument that there is no proof that this bill is not needed, in reference to Mr. Goodlatte's statement about the numbers of unemployed that we have. 14+ million unemployed in America, another 6, 7, or 8 million people that are underemployed in America. We have 80 million plus people in America who are of working age that are simply not in the workforce, and a recession of proportions that eclipses everything except the Great Depression, and we don't have proof that more visa lottery is needed, or is not needed. I think it's very clear. And the argument about diversity, I'm a little worn out with looking around trying to identify somebody's characteristics physically and calling that diversity. I think if we're interested in diversity, let's look at thought and expression, ability to contribute to society. Let's look at the things that cause people to contribute to our culture. It's not skin color. It's not national origin. It's the values that we have within us. And if we really want to address diversity, let's go to the universities across America and take a look at the professors and the curriculum and see about the lack of diversity in the thought process in our educational institutions in America. This is all a facade about diversity. Real diversity is being able to engage in thought and debate and understand fundamental principles, the principles of Western civilization, because that's what we are, and carry those values forward into America so we can be a better country. UN troops, I don't think I want to go into that, but the family relationships also. We know from sitting in this committee and testimony before this committee just a few years ago that only 7 to 11% of the legal immigration in America is based on merit. 7 to 11%. The rest of it is out of control of the Congress itself. This is only 50,000 that would be eliminated from that list of no merit required, as Mr. Goodlatte said. There's another nearly 1 million people, say around 900,000 people that come into America every year. They're never measured on what they can do to contribute to society. Our immigration policy should be designed to enhance the economic, the social, and the cultural well-being of the United States. Any nation should set an immigration policy that's designed to improve them. That's why I make this point. Now, that's 89 to 93% that come in here legally aren't based on merit. I would ask the chairman he would be interested in, and if the subcommittee chairman also were interested in, advancing this thought that we should set up a filter here in our legal immigration so that we can identify real merit and real diversity, people that can contribute to our society as a lot of the rest of the world has done, including Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia. Those, I think, set some models for us. We've had hearings on that subject matter, and I'd ask the chairman what he might think of such a proposal.
If the gentleman will yield, I certainly think we ought to admit individuals who will contribute to America.
And reclaim my time in thanking the chairman, I would yield it back to him. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Keene. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Mulder, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the gentlelady's amendment, and I simply want to say certainly we ought to look at people who contribute to society, but when I hear all this talk about merit, I wonder about how many of our grandparents and great-grandparents would have passed the merit test, and how many of us would be here if that had been applied uniformly 100 years ago. I'd now be happy to yield to the gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Mulder. I just want to make a clarifying point that the Nicaraguans in question that I mentioned earlier were legally admitted to the United States. They're not here in any kind of untoward fashion. They were admitted to the United States, unlike people who have fled from certain other parts of the world. For example, Cubans, they were not permitted to gain permanent status. And over the years, visas have dribbled out to those individuals. And they're not going away because they're here in lawful status. So that, the gentleman's concern, I think he was not probably on the committee when this was enacted into law, but it was a misstatement as to the issue. And I would just say, on the issue of merit, I think when you think about the American citizens who are trying to reunify with their unmarried sons and daughters, they have to wait 7 to 18 years to do that. Is there merit in having American citizens be able to be with their sons and daughters? I think so.
This is first considered our NumbersUSA's #1 priority from our beginning in 1996 has been to end chain migration.
But because he had the courage
she's arguing for chain migration.
Get on that boat,
one of the things that we argue is that there shouldn't be a waiting list. If immigrants come into the United States and they have adult sons and daughters, we do not believe that those adult sons and daughters have some kind of natural right to immigrate with their parents. These are adults. If their parents somehow or another qualify to come, that doesn't necessarily mean that their adult children qualify. So this is it's interesting how almost every immigration debate gets into so many other issues, doesn't it?
I thank the gentleman from New York. I want to emphasize that this program is heavily used by individuals from Africa and from Europe. To some of my colleagues' comments that took me a little bit by surprise because it seemed to suggest that immigrants who come from a particular place, such as Africa, have no values, have no ability to contribute. I don't think the diversity waiver program is mutually exclusive of individuals with values and who can come with talents to be of a great contribution. It is well noted that many of the physicians in the United States are African-based or African natives who have come and are physicians in many places around America. So the idea that the diversity visa has no value is one that is questionable at best. I think the other point is that I want to re-emphasize is that this is a legal pathway for immigration to this country. This is then a hypocritical approach. First, your statement is that we need to legalize or structure immigration here in the United States. We condemn the existence of those who are undocumented. Many of us have tried to put forward a comprehensive approach to immigration reform, which could, in its writing, could enhance all kinds of security.
This is another primary argument of the open borders people. That is, they believe that the immigration issue is about stopping illegal immigration, period. And, of course, comprehensive immigration reform has always been about, well, you solve illegal immigration by making all the illegal aliens legal and dramatically increasing the already engorged numbers of legal immigration. So, you know, that it always comes back around to that. The interesting thing about Sheila Jackson Lee is she represents a district in Houston that was represented by the former Congresswoman, Barbara Jordan. And she takes exactly the opposite position. Sheila Jackson Lee and Barbara Jordan are both Democrats, liberal, women, and African Americans, but absolutely opposite on this. Barbara Jordan led a commission. She was appointed by President Clinton. It was a bipartisan commission, and the recommendation of that commission in the mid-90s was eliminate the visa lottery. So just historically, it's very interesting to see her successor in that district fighting for more foreign workers, while, by the way, African American unemployment is absolutely through the roof in this country.
Mr. Simpson-Brenner?
Roll call vote.
Mr. Coble? No. Mr. Coble votes no. Mr. Gallagly? Mr. Goodlatte?
No.
Mr. Goodlatte votes no. Mr. Lundgren? Mr. Shabbat? Mr. Issa? Mr. Pence? Mr. Forbes? Mr. King? Mr. King votes no. Mr. Franks? Mr. Franks votes no. Mr. Gomert? Mr. Jordan? Mr. Poe? Mr. Chaffetz? Mr. Chaffetz votes no. Mr. Griffin? Mr. Marino? Mr. Gowdy? Mr. Gowdy votes no. Mr. Ross? Ms. Adams? No. Ms. Adams votes no. Mr. Quayle? Mr. Quayle votes no. Mr. Conyers? Mr. Conyers votes aye. Mr. Berman?
They called Republicans first. Now they're calling the Democrats.
Mr. Napper? Mr. Napper votes aye.
In seniority, okay.
Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott votes aye. Mr. Watt? Mr. Watt votes aye. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson Lee? Ms. Jackson Lee votes aye. Ms. Waters? Mr. Cohen? Mr. Cohen votes aye. Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson votes aye. Mr. Pierluisi? Mr. Pierluisi votes aye.
The amendment is carrying at the moment.
Mr. Quigley? Mr. Quigley votes aye.
There's a lot of Republicans standing in the doorway, though, waiting to cast their votes.
Mr. Deutsch? Yes. Mr. Deutsch votes yes. Ms. Sanchez?
The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Forbes.
Mr. Forbes votes no.
Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Simpson-Brenner votes no.
Gentleman from Indiana.
No. Mr. Pence votes no.
Gentleman from Texas. Mr. Gomert.
Mr. Gomert votes no.
Are there other members who wish to be recorded? Gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Marino.
Mr. Marino votes no.
The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Waters.
Ms. Waters votes aye.
Clerk will report.
So as you can see, what happens in these
Mr. Chairman, 12 members voted aye, 14 members voted nay.
Majority having voted against the amendment, the amendment is not agreed to. Are there other amendments? The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren.
4 Democrats didn't vote and 8 Republicans.
Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk. It's Lofgren Berman 110.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 704, offered by Ms. Lofgren and Mr. Berman. Strike Section 2 and insert the following.
I'd ask unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentlewoman is recognized to explain her amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Berman is at a Foreign Affairs Committee hearing all morning, markup, I believe, and so I'm offering this amendment on behalf of us both. The amendment replaces Section 2, which eliminates the diversity visas, with a section that would limit such visas to immigrants with approved family-based petitions, essentially changing the visa into a family diversity visa. The amendment would specifically make these visas available to persons who have an approved family-based immigration petition, are waiting for a visa due to backlogs in the family preference category, and are from an underrepresented country. Whether a country is underrepresented would be determined from using the same formula currently used by the diversity visa program, and visas would be made available to such persons based on the priority date of their approved petition. In other words, first come, first serve. Now, this bill eliminates the only visa program that uses diversity-based criteria, but it just throws the visas away, even though other legal immigration programs are way backlogged and starved for visas. So this would save these visas and put them in the family-based program. At the Immigration Subcommittee hearing in April on this bill, the bill's author, Congressman Goodlatte, testified as to the
so this amendment would not do away with the visa lottery, but would make sure that the only people who can play the lottery are people who are already in the backlog for chain migration, family chain migration categories. What we're seeing a pattern here is no matter what, the open borders people want to make sure that we don't reduce in any way the number of foreign workers coming into this country. I mean, it's and I you know, as you all know, we are a diverse bunch here politically in terms of political parties. But the fact is that for partisan Democrats, when they see 55,000 visas, they know that on average they vote 2-to-1 Democratic. So it's very important to make, and same thing with chain migration. Basically it's 2-to-1, 3-to-1. So there's a real party reason for Democrats, a self-interested reason, for Democrats to want to keep, no matter what, to make sure there's as many visas coming as possible, because it's kind of like a voter registration program. Now our problem with Republicans has always been businesses that want to keep as many people, they want as many workers coming as possible to loosen the labor market and to lower wages, to depress wages for all American workers. Fortunately, right now on this Judiciary Committee, it's not always been true, the Republicans are tending toward voting for the workers in their district as opposed to the cheap labor corporate lobbyists. But that happens to be happening right now. Right now, unfortunately, on this committee, the Democrats, instead of voting for the interests of the workers in their districts, tend to vote for the interests of bringing in more Democratic voters for the future. And that's kind of what we're seeing here, is this fight about, can we keep the number of visas as high as possible?
Non-functional for millions of American citizens and permanent residents is wrong. This amendment would essentially limit the 55,000 diversity visas to persons waiting in the family backlogs, reducing those backlogs. And remember, when the majority keeps telling us that they are for legal immigration, they're just against illegal immigration, this amendment would promote legal immigration. It would allow people who are playing by the rules to actually have a reward for playing by the rules. And I think this would also help preserve the diversity of our lawful immigration system and the absence of the diversity visa program by making sure that the diversity is the key on the allocation of the family visas. To vote against this amendment is really to vote against families, against diversity, and against legal immigrants. I think it would be an affront to U.S. citizens and permanent residents seeking benefits eligible for family members.
Yeah, it's such a linear argument. I mean, it just doesn't take into consideration the conditions on the ground for immigrants who have recently arrived, who have already kind of started to become part of the fabric of America. I mean, we see that they have also a high unemployment rate. I mean, it's the same. We're all kind of facing the same challenges here, and the challenges to workers couldn't be greater, just like Steve King had said earlier. And so, but it just seems to come down to, you know, you're against immigration if you want to reduce it even the slightest, not to zero, and you're for immigration if you want to increase the numbers. It's just a linear argument.
Good. Yep.
are not eligible for the visa lottery. This would put immigrants who have been waiting longer behind newer applicants simply because their country does not appear on a fluctuating list. Furthermore, this amendment gives the same expedited priority to sisters and brothers as it does to closer family members like spouses and children. Many members have concerns about chain immigration and believe we should give priority to spouses and closer relatives than brothers and sisters.
Amen.
This amendment does not address these issues. Many members have many different opinions about how best to utilize the green cards that would be available once the visa lottery is eliminated. Congressman Issa, for example, has a bill to allocate those green cards to highly skilled workers so that American businesses can have access to and retain the best and brightest employees in the world. I'm open to discussions about how best to reallocate those visas. However, I believe that should be a separate and full debate we conduct when and if the visa lottery is eliminated. This amendment is at best premature and at worst very, very unfair to many people who are on those waiting lists, and I urge members to oppose it.
Would the gentleman yield?
I would yield.
For a question. I don't agree with you, but I have an amendment, Mr. Berman and I have an amendment that would address the issue you've raised, which would allocate these visas, divide them between family-based and employment-based using the existing immigration preference system. Will you help and make sure that that amendment is considered germane here today?
No, I can't do that because I can't change the parliamentary rules of the House. But I also But I also believe that there is an appropriate time and place to consider that, and that is not in passage of this legislation, which is very straightforward and simply ends what I think is a bad program.
She's going to come up.
I would, in the future,
she has a lot of ideas on how to reallocate, as long as you keep the number of foreign workers coming in as high as possible.
What might be done in the future if these visas were to be reprogrammed for another purpose.
The gentleman yields back his time. Are there other members who wish to be heard? If not, the question is on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. And the opinion share the noes have it. The amendment is not.
Chairman, I'd like a recorded vote on
roll call vote has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Smith?
No.
Mr. Smith votes no. Mr. Sensenbrenner? Mr. Coble? Mr. Gallagly? Mr. Goodlatte? Mr. Goodlatte votes no. Mr. Lundgren? Mr. Shabbat? Mr. Issa? Mr. Pence?
They better go out and find some more
Yeah.
members. They almost lost that vote, the first one. Yeah, because they had a bunch of members that aren't showing up.
A bunch of these committee rooms are all next to each other, so the members wander from committee to committee based on what they serve on, and they also have meetings in rooms behind the committee room. So, but they start coming through the door eventually once they know the votes come in.
Mr. Jordan? Mr. Poe?
It's fortunate that they don't have to be there when they're first called. They can go back and still cast their vote before the clerk closes it.
Mr. Marino?
If you're seeing the same shot we are, you see a collection of congressmen right at the door.
Mr. Gowdy votes no.
Who didn't vote the first time around.
Mr. Ross? Ms. Adams? Ms. Adams votes no. Mr. Quayle? Mr. Quayle votes no. Mr. Conyers?
Aye.
Mr. Conyers votes aye. Mr. Berman? Mr. Nadler? Aye. Mr. Nadler votes aye. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott votes aye. Mr. Rott? Mr. Rott votes aye. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson Lee? Ms. Waters? Ms. Waters votes aye. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Cohen votes aye. Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson votes aye. Mr. Pierluisi? Mr. Pierluisi votes aye. Mr. Quigley? Mr. Quigley votes aye. Ms. Chu? Mr. Deutsch? Mr. Deutsch votes aye. Ms. Sanchez?
The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Marino.
Mr. Marino votes no.
The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Forbes.
Mr. Forbes votes no.
Gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner.
Mr. Sensenbrenner votes no.
Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomert.
Mr. Gomert votes no.
Gentleman from California, Mr. Isa.
Mr. Isa votes no.
Other gentleman from California, Mr. Gallagly.
Mr. Gallagly votes no.
Gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Koval.
No. Mr. Griffin votes no.
Gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Griffin votes no.
Make sure, Mr. Koval votes no.
Okay. Gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Griffin.
Mr. Griffin votes no.
Gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Pence.
Mr. Pence votes no.
Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe.
Mr. Poe votes no.
Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat votes no.
Mr. Shabbat votes no.
Are there other members who wish to be recorded? If not, the clerk will call the roll. The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, 11 members voted aye, 19 members voted no.
Majority voting voted against the amendment. The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any other amendments? The gentleman from California, Ms. Lofgren, is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk. It's Lofgren-Berman 111.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Chairman, I reserve a point of order.
And a point of order has been reserved against the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 704, offered by Mrs. Lofgren and Mr. Berman. At the end of the bill, add the following. Section 3, use of visa numbers for family-sponsored and employment-based...
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read, and the gentleman offering the amendment is recognized to explain the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment adds the 55,000 visas eliminated by the bill to the remaining immigrant visa program, providing half to the family-based system and half to the employment-based system. Now, if you say you support legal immigration, I think you should support the amendment. The bill before us not only eliminates the diversity visa program, it also just eliminates the visas, while there's a shortage of visas in other immigrant categories.
Well, there's a shortage of workers in this country, right? I mean, there's all these jobs that aren't being filled.
With family members, and also prevents companies from attracting and retaining the talent they need to keep America competitive. This amendment simply moves those visas into the remaining immigrant visa
There's 22
program.
million Americans that can't find a job, just don't exist in Zoe Lofgren's world.
Not today.
My colleagues on the other side of the aisle who have supported eliminating the diversity visas say that they are for the legal immigration system. Well, if that's the case, let's allow the legal immigration system to work. We have immigrants from Mexico who are legally here, who are married and have minor children, and they are waiting years to be reunited with husbands and wives and minor children. That's not right. We have, on the employment side, a huge backlog of Indian and Chinese engineers. In some cases, Indian PhDs are going to wait a decade or more because of a lack of visas. And this is when the Department of Labor has already proven through the system that there is nobody available to take the job that they have been offered. So this would use these visas half to solve that problem. I think if we don't take these visas and allocate them to this system, we're really saying to those Mexicans who have waited so long, played by the rules, you know, you're just going to wait a lot longer. And to those talented PhD recipients who are building Silicon Valley.
She was saying that they had to be, you know, underrepresented nations. I'm not sure.
All of a sudden she's talking about Mexico.
I think that it would be smart of us if we're going to eliminate
the diversity
visa program to utilize the visas in a way that will strengthen our country, that will strengthen families by allowing husbands and wives to be reunified, by allowing American citizens to be reunited with their sons and daughters.
There's no limit
to allow American
on
companies
husbands and wives
prosper.
for immigrants who naturalize and become U.S. citizens. So just to make that clear, there is no backlog for spouses and minor
Yes,
children.
Mr. Chairman, I do insist on my point of order because the bill we are considering today only makes changes to the visa diversity program. The rules of the House require that amendments be on the same subject as the bill under consideration, and this amendment is on a different subject because it addresses family-based immigration, which is a completely different category of immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Goodlatte. Does the gentleman from California wish to speak on the point of order?
I'll just say this. The parliamentarian is a nonpartisan office that makes rulings without regard to the minority or the majority. I don't dispute their impartiality. I would just say I question the judgment of the majority in failing to accept this amendment, which they could do. And with that, I would yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Lofgren. The chair is prepared to rule on the point of order. In the opinion of the chair, the amendment is not germane. Are there other amendments? If not, a reporting quorum being present, the question is on reporting the bill favorably to the House. Those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is ordered reported favorably.
Ask for a recorded vote.
The recorded vote has been requested, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Smith votes aye. Mr. Sensenbrenner? Mr. Coble?
Remember, this is a point
Mr.
of this is a vote on a point of order to keep
Mr. Goodlatte?
the amendment from being voted on.
Mr. Goodlatte
so
votes
the yes
aye.
and no is switched here.
Mr. Lundgren? Mr. Shabbat? Mr. Issa? Mr. Issa votes aye. Mr. Pence? Mr. Forbes? Mr. King? Mr. King votes aye. Mr. Franks? Mr. Franks votes aye.
See something, say something.
Mr. Gomer? Mr. Jordan? Mr. Poe? Mr. Chaffetz? Mr. Chaffetz votes aye. Mr. Griffin? Mr. Marino? Mr. Gowdy? Mr. Gowdy votes aye. Mr. Ross? Mr. Ross votes aye. Ms. Adams? Ms. Adams votes aye. Mr. Quayle? Mr. Quayle votes aye. Mr. Conyers? Mr. Conyers votes no. Mr. Berman? Mr. Nadler? Mr. Nadler votes no. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott votes no. Mr. Rott? Mr. Rott votes no. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes no. Ms. Jackson Lee? Ms. Waters? Ms. Waters votes no. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Cohen votes no. Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson votes no. Mr. Chmielenski? Mr. Chmielenski votes no. Mr. Quigley? Mr. Quigley votes no. Ms. Chu? Mr. Deutsch? Ms. Sanchez?
The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Marino.
Mr. Marino votes yes.
Gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Forbes.
Mr. Forbes votes yes.
Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe.
Yes.
Gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner.
Mr. Sensenbrenner votes aye.
Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat. Gentleman from Iowa, no. Gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Pence.
Mr. Pence votes aye.
Gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Coble.
Mr. Coble votes aye.
Gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Griffin.
Mr. Griffin votes aye.
Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomer.
Mr. Gomer votes aye. Ms. Chu?
The gentleman from California, Ms. Chu, votes no. Are there other members who wish to be recorded? The gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an appropriate time before the vote is cast. We're not going to be offering an amendment that would appear to be similar to Ms. Lofgren's for a reason. I believe very strongly that these 55,000 slots should be used for permanent, highly qualified PhDs and the like, and have a piece of legislation that would do that. I realize this is not the right time to do it. I think with the gentlelady, my colleague from California, if you want to accomplish that highly qualified PhD and the like, that we do have, and I will work with my my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to bring that legislation in so that we can target.
This is Congressman Issa from California. He's a Republican, but he was going to offer an amendment similar to the one that was just voted down, offered by Congressman Berman, that would reallocate visas from the visa lottery to employment-based visas. Congressman Issa is particularly interested in having those visas reallocated to STEM type people, which are individuals that come to the United States and graduate in degrees in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, basically highly skilled people. But he's withdrawing his amendment in light of the ruling against Congressman Berman's amendment that it was non-germane. Did I say that all right, Andrew?
You did.
Okay,
That's exactly
making
right.
sure.
In the order in which they are listed, with the exception of the last bill we have down in the schedule, H.R. 2552, the Identity Theft Improvement Act of 2011. I expect to take that up next week.
What about 1981? The Protecting Children
There's
from the
about
Internet.
7 other bills that they were expecting to mark up during
next week. 1981, Protection Children from
today's markup, and then another markup that they scheduled for yesterday. So,
thank you.
Rep. Lofgren and Congressman Smith are just kind of going over exactly what they're going to accomplish
Do you
today and
expect to take
tomorrow.
up every building except every bill except 1981 today?
That is correct. That's
We sort of dodge. That's dodging a bullet for Issa to pull his amendment, because that's a Republican. And all he has to do is get 3 Republicans.
Right.
To get 3 Republicans to go for ISIS.
Establish programs in the Department of Justice and in the Department
Is there another
of
amendment or
Security
not?
to help states that have high rates of homicide and other violent crime, and for other purposes.
The fact the bill will be considered as read.
What's
I
the vote?
recognize myself in an opening statement and then the ranking member. H.R. 1550, the Federal Law Enforcement Recruitment and Retention Act of 2011, was introduced by Mr.
I think that was the vote on the bill,
but no roll call.
No, they did have a roll call just before.
But wasn't the roll? I thought the roll call was too.
Okay. We missed that one. I missed it.
1991.
So they also may have rolled the final passage till later.
Including tougher penalties
It's possible,
and
but they
truth
didn't.
sentencing laws, and dedicated additional resources
check
to
with
target the rising
the
crime
team.
rate.
We got
It
part of our
appears
team is
that
right in the
focus on crime has been successful.
is right in the
Since
room
mid-1990s, crime has
of the hearing room right now, and but the
since the mid-1970s.
yeah, that is scary, because this is where the Republicans are very undependable. A lot of them had this idea that with 310 million Americans, including 39 million immigrants in this country, that these 310 million people, we cannot find enough smart people to do science and technology and engineering and medical work. I mean, it really is kind of astounding. We have the 3rd largest population in the world, and you've got people like Zoe Lofgren, but also people like, like Issa, a lot of Republicans who say Americans aren't smart enough, are not motivated enough to do these jobs. At the same time, we have almost historically high unemployment in those categories. College degree Americans aged 21 to 29, 12.5% who want a full-time job can't find one right. 12.5%, that's the unemployment rate. 12.5% for Americans who've graduated from college in the last 8 years. Among Hispanic Americans in that group, graduate from college, it's 14% unemployment. Among Black Americans who graduated from college, it's 1 out of every 5, 20%. So when you have people that are saying, we got this shortage of educated people in this country, I don't know, it's so offensive. And it's obviously they have ulterior motives. It's not about the shortage, since the shortage doesn't exist. And I do think in most cases it's the Republicans that are pushing it. It's they've got some kind of business group that's lobbying them and probably putting money into their campaign tails to push for that, to push for these higher pieces. And among the Democrats, it's partly that, because a lot of them are getting money from the companies too. And it's also because they know that immigrants vote 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 in every election for Democrats. So, but this is a great morning.
Right, and just to kind of support what you just said, Alan Greenspan, who is the former chair of the Federal Reserve, just did an interview 2 days ago, I think it was, where he offered his support for more high-skilled immigrants. He said the immigration debate tends to be on low income, the level of immigration of low-income individuals. And he says we should be able to give a green card to every immigrant who gets an advanced degree in the United States. Again, totally disregarding the unemployment stats that you just offered.
Well, Greenspan famously several years ago, when the Republicans were in control of everything, testified that we should have more skilled immigration because it would lower the wages for skilled workers. He said this would hold inflation down if we lower the wages, have more immigrants working in those fields. I mean, this is what you do when your economic philosophy is divorced from humanity.
No, I did get word from our Hill team,
okay.
And that last roll call was the final passage of the bill.
I yapped right over it.
And,
sorry about that.
That's all right. We think it was 19 to 11, but we're still waiting on a final roll call. But that would have mirrored the vote on the last amendment, so that would make sense.
But the important part is that the visa lottery cleared the committee without any amendments.
And this is, just to put this in perspective, this is kind of, right now, this is going the way you're taught in school, that government works. A bill is introduced, it goes through committee, members of the committee offer amendments.
And of course they had hearings earlier. They've had hearings on this bill.
Hearings before. Now that it's gone through, then what happens next is you hope to see this come to the floor of the House. And then the House votes. If they vote for it, then you would expect to see it go through some committee in the Senate, and then it would come to the floor of the Senate, and if it were passed, then it would go to the President. Now that's not really, that's how it's in the textbooks, but that's not how, that isn't the way things work, is it? I mean, Andrew, your decade up on the Hill, what kind, I mean, I know you don't know the exact percentage, but what kind of ratio of bills that pass committees actually come to a vote on the floor?
Oh, it definitely does vary from even year to year, Congress to Congress, depending on the leadership, how much leeway they're giving their chairman to kind of advance things within committee, but then if they have a lot more control over what they want to pass over on the floor, it really does vary. And of course, the visa lottery now, if it does come to the floor, it will potentially face additional amendments at that part of the process.
Who decides whether it comes to the floor? Who will decide right now?
The House leadership, unequivocally.
Who's that? Who is the House leadership?
The House leadership, John Boehner.
Of Ohio.
Of Ohio.
Speaker of the House.
The Speaker of the House, McCarthy. The whip, Cantor, of course, from Virginia, is the majority leader. And then you've got some of the other players. You have a lot of sway when you talk about a guy like Jim Jordan, who's the chairman of the RSC.
The Republican Study Committee.
Republican Study Committee. Yes, sorry about that. There's a few others. Of course, David Dreyer is the chairman for the Rules Committee, so he'll have a little bit of a say over how it looks and how it comes to the floor through the process.
So this group. So one of the things that we will do for you and NumbersUSA members is we will use our resources, our knowledge, and especially with our Capitol Hill team, who are not here. They're I guess it's 1.5 miles away. The Capitol, I believe, is 1.5 miles from here. And our little Capitol Hill office is 1 block from the House of Representatives. But our Capitol Hill team will certainly advise us along the way. And we will, those of you who are in the districts of Republican leaders will be getting a lot of opportunities really put some pressure on those leaders to bring this to the floor. Because the fact is that lots and lots of bills that pass committees never see the light of day. And the House is basically a dictatorship. The Speaker of the House, the Speaker of the House is a dictator unless, is able to be a dictator unless basically his party reins him in. But as long as his party allows him to be a dictator, he can just pretty much do he or she. Pelosi did this the last 4 years. Hastert was a dictator before, and now Boehner's the dictator.
You do have tremendous structural advantages that have come throughout the history of the House, and it has made the speakership a very, very powerful position. Now there are a couple ways around it, but you literally almost never see a discharge petition, for instance. If more than half of the members in the House sign a petition, you can get a bill to the floor without, you can bypass the normal process.
Almost never happens.
Never.
I can't even remember one.
It is such, the minority oftentimes will try to do, whoever the minority party is in that Congress will sometimes try to do one, but you need people from the majority to come over, and it's such procedurally, it's such a big deal to enjoin one of those petitions if you're in the majority that you try to find a way, even if you support the cause, you try to find a different way to support it.
So the U.S. House of Representatives Judiciary Committee, which has primary responsibility for immigration policy, has just passed a bill to kill the visa lottery. The visa lottery since 1990 has been raffling off about 55,000 permanent work visas every year. And during these 3 years of a job depression, the visa lottery has been raffling off another 55,000 permanent work visas every year. This bill is probably the most effective jobs bill that's come up in the last 2 or 3 years. And it costs nothing. It will cost nothing, because that's 55,000. If this passes this year, that means next year there's 55,000 Americans who have a chance for a job that won't have to be competing with those 55,000 new workers. Right? What's been happening all year, I believe, is that we've been producing, the economy has been producing fewer jobs every month than we bring in new foreign workers.
Right. That's right.
Right.
And so you see, even last month, the job number was what, 18,000
created
for the whole month. And especially when you look at these recent immigrants, and we know that the visa lottery brings in mostly, low-skilled workers. And again, it's a lot of the folks who are doing low-skilled jobs are looking for a low-skilled job, and currently Americans. This is a terrible competition for them.
So here's, as we said, it faces there's a lot of barriers it's got to get across, but what's going to happen now is that we will use our members to push Speaker Boehner to bring this bill to the floor. As Andrew says, it'll face amendments there. I figure pretty much these same types of amendments. Our big job is going to, as we try to push this bill, I don't think it's to push it on the security measures. I don't think it's to push it on the fact that they're low skill, even though that's a very important point. Our point is to say these are 55,000 workers that we don't need, and we don't need to replace them with 55,000 other kinds of workers. What we want to do is bring, we brought in about a 1.1 million immigrants, legal immigrants last year, 1.1 million permanent work permits, and this is kind of a drop in the bucket. But if this were to be signed into law, it would be the first reduction in legal immigration since 1924. Legal immigration has been rising since 1945. So we have 66 years of legal immigration increases. And this, it was basically kind of, Congress did not make any changes during the Depression and World War II. But the last time Congress actually voted to reduce legal immigration was 1924. So it's very important. This has happened even going through a committee. It's very rare. It did get through a committee in 2004. It got through Judiciary Committee, and it got through the Judiciary Committee in 1996. but it was defeated on the floor. 6 years after this lottery was started, it did get through Judiciary Committee, but the House of Representatives, in control of the Republicans, defeated this. It was Congressman Goodlatte had the amendment, and Congressman Lamar Smith was the one that ushered it through in his bill. So we got, this is 15 years later, the same characters, Goodlatte and Lamar Smith. They got that close. They got to the floor of the House. Speaker Gingrich, who was always our enemy on these immigration issues, when he was first majority leader and then when he was Speaker, he worked against us, and so the Republican-led Congress killed this with help of lots of Democrats in '96. As we've said before, it did come up in the Republican-controlled House in December of '05, and it passed overwhelmingly with lots of Democratic votes. So I think I feel pretty optimistic that we can get this. If it can get to the floor, it can pass the House. We're going to have a little bit of danger with the ISA type amendment of reallocating these to high-skilled workers. We're going to have to work against that. And then in the Senate, our hope is we're going to have somebody who will introduce this as an amendment. The Senate is not a dictatorship in the way that the House is. Each senator has a lot more power, and we will have hope that we already know we have friends in the Senate who will introduce this bill if it gets to the House as an amendment to another bill. And so we have great hope to get a vote there, and that'll be another big fight. So this is, thanks for joining us. We've had, I see we've had over 3,000 people join us this morning. That's pretty good. I know most of you probably have jobs or responsibilities with family or something else, and you're real policy wonks to tune in and stick with us.
Especially for those on the West Coast.
That's right. The West Coast started a little early, didn't we?
And just a thanks for our tech team, especially Adam Schroeder. We had every single possible technical issue that you can possibly imagine in starting this webcast today.
Yeah,
so,
we're sorry that we were delayed. We told you we'd start at 10, and we didn't. But I mean, basically what happened was that the House Judiciary Committee changed the format today of the way they've been.
It was a different kind of link that they were sending out their webcasts in, and we couldn't get their webcast up and running, so we couldn't confirm that we were actually successfully webcasting. So lots of different issues, but thanks for sticking with us. As Roy mentioned, we have more than 3,000 people join us and had 500, 600, 700 throughout the entire broadcast. So
and we got to see a happy ending. That's nice.
That's always good.
We're working for happy endings. We could change our name to NumbersUSA Happy Endings or something. We do have some possibility of a markup of a mandatory E-Verify bill before the August break, but we don't know. I mean, there's no date set. There's some possibility, and if we do, we will do the same thing then. We will try to. What we're trying to do is, I mean, we're not a TV production company, but we're going to try to do what we've been doing since last fall, which is every time there's something happening in a committee or on the floor involving immigration, to give you a chance to watch it live and also have some explanation and polemics going along at the same time. And so we appreciate all of your attention, and please keep watching the action alerts. There may be still a lot of things happening before Congress goes home on summer break. Chris, any last?
No, I think that about covers it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Have a good day.